This is our other daughter. She cleans houses for a living, my mother told the groom's family, smiling like she was apologizing for a stain on the tablecloth. My father nodded, added, "We've given up on her." 32 guests heard it. I heard it louder than all of them. What my mother didn't know, what she never once bothered to ask, was that cleaning houses had turned into a company spanning 14 states. And the woman sitting directly across from me, the groom's mother, I was about to say something that would drain every last drop of color from my mother's face. Before I go on, if this story speaks to you, I'd appreciate a like and subscribe. And drop a comment. Where are you watching from right now, and what time is it there? I'm Morgan. I'm 32, and this is the night I stopped asking my family to see me. Let me take you back to a Saturday evening in September, the night of my sister Lauren's engagement dinner. Now, I was 3 years old when Janet and Richard Meadows brought me home. Ridgewood, Indiana. Population 4,000, one traffic light, and a whole lot of opinions about other people's business. For the first 4 years, I was the miracle. The little girl the Meadows family chose. Pastor Collins mentioned it every Thanksgiving. Neighbors baked casseroles. Janet carried me on her hip at church like a living badge of generosity. Then Lauren was born. I remember the exact week things shifted. And not because anyone said anything cruel, not yet, but because the house rearranged itself around her. My bedroom moved to the converted attic. My drawings came off the refrigerator to make room for Lauren's hospital bracelet, framed in pink. My car seat went to the garage. By the time I was 10, the narrative had solidified. Lauren was the dancer, the honor student, the one Janet described to neighbors as our girl. I was the other one. The project. The charity case they kept feeding. "Whoosh, we tried our best with Morgan," Janet would say at the mailbox, loud enough for Mrs. Patterson next door to hear. "Some things just aren't in the blood." She said it like she was talking about a stain she couldn't lift. Richard never corrected her, not once. He'd sit in his recliner, turn a page of the newspaper, and let the silence do his talking. That silence was louder than anything Janet ever said, because Janet's cruelty came with a smile. Richard's came with permission. And I learned early, in this house, love had a guest list, and my name was never on it. But there was one thing Janet Meadows never bothered to learn about me, and that one thing would eventually change everything. I graduated from Ridgewood High on a Tuesday. Janet didn't come. Lauren had a dance recital the same afternoon, 2 towns over. Richard said he'd try to make it. He didn't. I packed 2 duffel bags that night and moved into a studio apartment above a laundromat in Greenfield. At 18 years old, $400 in a savings account I'd built from babysitting since I was 13. I enrolled in community college, night classes. During the day, I cleaned houses. It wasn't glamorous. It was toilets and baseboards and oven grease and strangers' hair and shower drains. But it was mine. Every dollar I earned on my knees, literally, and nobody could tell me I didn't deserve it. Janet told her friends at church, "Lauren starts at IU next month." Morgan chose a different path. She said different the way people say terminal. I called home on Sundays. Janet was always busy. Richard didn't pick up. When I got my first business license, a real one, framed, my name printed in black ink, I took a photo and texted it to Janet. She replied, "Cute. One word, no period, no follow-up." I almost quit that week, almost drove back to Ridgewood, walked into that house and begged them to just see me. Just once. But then Grace Whitfield happened. She was 74, lived alone on Maple Court, and she was my very first client. One afternoon, while I was scrubbing her kitchen tile, she set down a glass of sweet tea and said, "Honey, you clean better than any company I've ever hired. You should expand." That was the seed, planted by a stranger, watered by every year my family refused to look. 14 years later, I got the invitation. Cream-colored cardstock, gold foil lettering. Lauren Meadows and Kevin Holloway. Engagement dinner. Millbrook Grill. Saturday, September 14th, 6 o'clock. I was still reading it when my phone buzzed. Janet. "Morgan, we need to talk about Saturday." I could already hear it, the stage directions. "The Holloways are very well respected," she said. "Kevin's mother runs some kind of company. Big money people. I don't want you to, draw attention." "Draw attention how?" Just don't bring up your work, okay? The cleaning thing. It's not the kind of impression we need. I held the phone away from my face for 3 seconds. Breathed. You don't want me to mention my job. I want you to blend in. That's all I ask. Blend in. That was always the instruction. Not be yourself. Not we're proud of you. Just disappear politely. I almost said no. Almost deleted the invitation and spent Saturday night reviewing quarterly reports at my kitchen table. That would have been easier, safer. But then Lauren called. And separately, quietly, the way she always did when Janet wasn't in the room. Hey sis, I really want you there. Please come. She sounded like the 4-year-old who used to crawl into my attic bed during thunderstorms, before Janet taught her that needing me was weakness. I'll be there, I said. Saturday evening, I stood outside Millbrook Grill at 6:47 p.m. I straightened my blouse, checked my reflection in the window, took one breath. I had no idea that Diane Holloway would be inside, and I had no idea what she would recognize. And I had no idea that within 2 hours, every person in my family would wish I had never walked through that door. Millbrook Grill was the nicest restaurant in Ridgewood, which meant white tablecloths, candles in mason jars, and a wine list that went up to $40. For this town, that was black tie. The private dining room held about 30 people. Long rectangular table in the center, a smaller round table tucked near the window for overflow. I have fresh flowers, soft jazz through a ceiling speaker. I walked in on time, hair pinned up, navy dress, modest neckline. I looked professional. I looked like someone who belonged. Janet didn't greet me. She was mid-conversation with a woman I didn't recognize, hand on the woman's arm, laughing too loudly. When she saw me, her expression didn't change. It just paused. Oh, you made it. There's a spot over there. She tilted her chin toward the round table. The main table's full. I glanced at the long table, counted the chairs. There was one empty, right next to Lauren. A cream-colored handbag sat on the seat, Janet's handbag. She followed my eyes, didn't move it. I walked to the round table and sat next to a second cousin whose name I couldn't remember. He was already on his second beer and barely looked up. From here I could see the whole room but felt invisible in it, which I realized was exactly Janet's design. Then Kevin spotted me. But he broke away from his conversation, walked over, extended his hand. You must be Morgan. Lauren talks about you. I'm glad you're here. Before I could answer, Janet appeared at his elbow. Kevin, sweetheart, come meet Aunt Ruth. She just flew in from Florida. She steered him away without looking at me, like redirecting traffic from a dead end. The main course hadn't arrived yet when Diane Holloway asked the question. She was seated near the head of the table, silver hair, and sharp posture, the kind of presence that made waitstaff stand straighter. She'd been watching the room all evening, watching Janet perform. And the young woman by the window? Diane asked, turning to Janet. Is she also your daughter? Janet hesitated. 1 second, but I caught it. Oh, that's Morgan. She's adopted. She lowered her voice just enough to make it sound confidential. Yeah, she cleans houses for a living. She said it the way you'd explain a blemish on an otherwise clean report. Richard was buttering a roll. Without looking up, he added, We've given up on her. Given up? He said it like returning a library book, calmly, completely. The table went quiet, not dramatically, just that half-second pause where everyone suddenly becomes very interested in their silverware. A woman near the end coughed softly. Kevin's younger brother looked at his plate. But I sat 12 feet away, and I heard every syllable. My hands were under the table. I pressed my nails into my palms. Then I looked at Diane Holloway. She wasn't looking away like the others. She wasn't embarrassed. She was looking directly at me, steady, focused, the way you look at someone when you're trying to place a face. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, in recognition. Something shifted behind her expression, a flicker, a connection forming. I didn't understand it yet, so I didn't know what she'd seen or where she'd seen it. All I knew was that the way she was looking at me was different from every other person at that table. It wasn't pity, it was something else entirely. I could leave. I could stand up, put my napkin on the chair, walk out, and never come back. I'd done it before, in smaller ways. Stopped calling on Sundays. Stopped texting photos of milestones. Stopped expecting the reply that never came. But leaving tonight wouldn't be a statement. It would just be expected. Janet would shake her head, say she's always been sensitive, and the evening would continue without a ripple. So I sat there. And I thought about 29 years. The business license. Cute. My first franchise location. A 3-bedroom office in Columbus with my name on the lease. I'd called home to share the news. Janet said she was busy prepping for Lauren's birthday brunch, the Inc. magazine interview. I never even sent it. Not because I was afraid she'd dismiss it. I was afraid she'd find a way to make it about herself. Well, I raised her, she'd tell the church. She'd frame it on the mantel next to Lauren's sorority photo. She'd take credit for the thing she spent 2 decades belittling. So I kept it. Kept all of it. My company, my revenue, my name in print. I kept it in a world she never entered because she never asked to. I looked across the room at Lauren. She was laughing at something Kevin said. But her eyes drifted toward me, brief, guilty. She looked away fast. Even Lauren couldn't save me in this house. She never could. But tonight wasn't about being saved. Tonight, for the first time, I wanted to know if I was strong enough to sit in the room where I'd always been erased, and not collapse. I picked up my water glass, took a sip, stayed. I wonder, why did I keep going back to that table? Have you ever kept showing up somewhere you knew you'd be treated like you didn't matter? Why do you think we do that? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments. Janet was 3 glasses of Chardonnay in and performing for the Holloways like her life depended on it. She leaned toward Diane, gesturing with her fork. We tried everything with Morgan, piano lessons, ballet, church camp one summer. Nothing stuck. Pam Driscoll, Janet's closest friend, seated 2 chairs down, laughed on cue. Well, at least she knows hard work. Janet tilted her head. Hard work? She scrubs toilets, Pam. More laughter. Quiet, polite, the kind that sounds like permission. I sat at my small table, napkin twisted in my lap, and listened to my mother narrate my failure to a room full of people who didn't know me. Each sentence was a brick. She was building a wall between me and respectability, right there in public, and she was smiling while she did it. Diane Holloway did not laugh. I noticed. She set her wine glass down, carefully, deliberately, and folded her hands. Us residential cleaning? Diane said. Her voice was even, casual, but something underneath it was pointed. Do you know which company she works for? Janet waved a hand. Some outfit, I don't keep track. You don't know the name? It's not exactly worth knowing. Diane held Janet's gaze for 1 beat longer than comfortable. Then she turned toward me. Not all the way, just a quarter turn, enough that I saw her profile shift. She was studying me. The way you study a painting you've seen in a magazine and are now seeing in person for the first time. I didn't know why. Not yet. But the air at the table had changed. Something had snagged in Diane Holloway's memory, and she was pulling at the thread. Janet didn't notice. She never noticed anything that wasn't about Lauren. The appetizers were being cleared when Janet turned the spotlight on me. She twisted in her chair. That's that sugary voice she used when she wanted to seem generous in front of company. Morgan, honey, why don't you tell everyone what you're doing these days? I'm sure they'd love to hear. The room shifted. 30 sets of eyes found me. A fork clinked against a plate. The jazz from the speaker suddenly felt very loud. I set down my water glass. I run a residential cleaning company, I said. Flat, simple, no embellishment. Janet smiled at Diane. See? She says run. That's generous. A few chuckles around the table, soft ones, the kind people make when they're not sure if they're supposed to laugh, but don't want to be rude. Richard shook his head slowly, a sigh that carried the weight of practiced disappointment. Don't push her, Diane. She's doing her best. He paused, took a sip of his bourbon. Her best. The repetition landed like a slap. Her best, as though my best was something to mourn. And I pressed my thumbnail into my palm under the table, felt the sting, kept my face still. And then I noticed Diane. She'd placed her napkin beside her plate. Her fingers rested flat on the tablecloth, the way someone does when they're about to stand, or about to speak, or about to change the temperature of the entire room. She was looking at me, not the way the others looked. with secondhand embarrassment or polite avoidance. Like she was looking at me the way someone looks when a name is on the tip of their tongue. Like she was one detail away from placing exactly where she'd seen my face before. It was Lauren who broke first. Barely. "Mom." Her voice was small, almost a whisper. "Maybe we don't need to." Janet turned to her daughter with the speed of someone who's been challenged in her own home. Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes sharpened. "I'm telling the truth, Lauren." What's there to hide?" Lauren looked at her plate, pressed her lips together, sat back. 28 years of training. That's how long Janet had spent teaching Lauren that silence was loyalty. And right now, loyalty meant letting our mother dismantle me in front of 30 people without interference. I didn't blame Lauren, not entirely. I'd watched her grow up in that house. I knew the cost of speaking out, the silent treatment, the guilt, at the way Janet could make you feel like the villain for pointing out she was being cruel. Lauren survived the same house I did. She just survived it from the other side of the door. Kevin shifted in his seat. He glanced at his mother, Diane. And I saw something pass between them. A look I didn't fully understand. Diane was tapping her index finger against the tablecloth, lightly, rhythmically, a private metronome. Kevin leaned in. "Mom, you okay?" Diane didn't turn to him, yet her eyes were still on me. "Fine," she said. "I'm just trying to remember something." She said it quietly, almost to herself. Kevin knew his mother. I could see it in the way he sat back, not dismissing her, but recognizing the signal. Whatever Diane Holloway was working through, he knew better than to interrupt it. The main course arrived, plates were set down, conversations resumed. But Diane didn't touch her food. She was somewhere else. Somewhere in her memory, a door was opening. As it happened between the entree and the breadbasket, Diane set her fork down, turned toward me, fully this time, and asked the question that would unravel everything. "Morgan, what's the name of your company?" The table didn't stop talking. It wasn't a dramatic moment. Not yet. Just a polite question from the groom's mother to the bride's sister. Ordinary on the surface. Janet answered before I could. She leaned in, her hand on Diane's arm, voice wrapped in apology. "Mrs. Holloway." Really? Don't trouble yourself. She just..." Diane raised one hand, small, unhurried, but absolute. "I asked Morgan." 3 words. No edge, no volume. Just clarity so clean it cut through Janet like glass. Janet's mouth stayed open for a half second. Then she closed it. I looked at Diane. She looked at me. "Meadowshine Residential," I said. The name sat in the air between us. Diane's expression changed. Not dramatically. She wasn't a dramatic woman, but her eyes widened by a fraction. Her chin tilted, and she repeated the name, quietly, like tasting a word she already knew. "Meadowshine." She said it twice. The second time slower. Kevin looked at his mother. He'd been watching her all evening. The tapping finger, the distracted gaze, the way she'd been circling something without landing on it. Now she was landing. "Mom?" he said again. "What is it?" Diane didn't answer him. She reached for her wine glass, took a slow sip, and set it down without drinking. But her eyes hadn't left mine. She knew something. I could feel it. I just didn't know what yet. And neither, for the first time in her life, did Janet. Diane excused herself from the table. "If you'll pardon me for just a moment." She folded her napkin, stood, and walked toward the hallway that led to the restrooms. Calm, measured, the way she did everything. Kevin half stood. "Mom?" "1 minute, sweetheart." I watched her go. From my seat by the window, and I had a clear line of sight through the glass partition to the corridor. Diane stopped halfway down the hall, pulled her phone from her clutch, and began scrolling. She wasn't checking messages. She was searching for something. Back at the main table, Janet had already filled the gap. She turned to Pam and another friend, voice low but not low enough. "Thank God the Holloways are gracious people. Nobody's paying attention to, you know." A small tilt of her head in my direction. And I didn't react. I'd stopped reacting to Janet's narration of my irrelevance years ago. Instead, I kept my eyes on the hallway. Diane had stopped scrolling. Her thumb was still on the screen, but she wasn't moving it. She was reading. Then her hand came up, slowly, and touched her lips. And she smiled. Not a social smile, not a polite one. It was the smile of someone who just confirmed something they'd been suspecting all evening. She looked up from the phone and glanced toward the dining room. Through the glass, her eyes found me, and this time, the recognition was complete. Then she looked at Janet, then back at me. She slid the phone into her clutch, straightened her jacket, and walked back to the table. Her posture was different now, straighter, more deliberate, like someone who'd just been handed a card she intended to play. Something was about to change. I could feel it in the way the air thinned. Janet stood up, tapped a butter knife against her wine glass. The room quieted. "I'd like to say a few words." She pressed her hand to her chest, the gesture she used in church when she wanted people to know she was being sincere. "First, I want to thank the Holloway family for welcoming our Lauren with such warmth. Kevin, you are exactly the kind of man we prayed for." Kevin smiled politely. Diane did not. "I want to thank my husband Richard for being my partner through it all. Every sacrifice, every late night, we built this family together." She paused, looked around the room with glistening eyes. "And Lauren, sweetheart, you are our pride, our only pride. Everything we worked for sits right here, in this moment, watching you begin your life. Our only pride." She said it while I was sitting 12 feet away. She didn't glance at me, not even the peripheral kind of acknowledgement you'd give a coat rack. "Our family isn't perfect," Janet continued, her voice softening to that rehearsed tremble she'd mastered. "We've had our challenges." Now she looked at me, just long enough for the room to understand exactly who the challenge was. "But tonight is about Lauren." A few guests clapped, awkward, thin applause, the kind that fills silence because silence would be worse. Richard raised his glass. Pam said, "Hear, hear." I sat still. My face was neutral. My chest was not. Then from the head of the table, a chair pushed back. Diane Holloway stood. She smoothed the front of her jacket, placed both hands on the table. "I'd also like to say a few words," she said. And the room turned. But before Diane could speak, a man seated near the middle of the table, one of Kevin's uncles, gray beard, kind face, leaned forward and looked at me. "Morgan, right? So how's the cleaning business going? You run your own crew?" It was a genuine question. He was trying to include me. The one person at the table who saw a girl sitting alone and thought, "That's not right." Janet laughed before I could answer. "Business." She pressed her hand to her sternum. "Let's not get carried away. It's a van and some buckets." The uncle's smile faded. He looked down. Richard set his glass down and spoke without lifting his eyes. "Don't push her. She's done her best." A pause, a sip. Her best. For someone like her. Someone like her. Somewhere at the table, a woman inhaled sharply. Silverware stopped moving. I felt the heat climb from my sternum to my throat. Not anger. Something older. The accumulated weight of every dismissed achievement, every unreturned call, every time I was introduced as the family's footnote. But I didn't fold. I placed both hands on the table, flat, steady, and I looked at my mother. "Have you ever asked me what my company does?" Janet blinked. "Excuse me? In 14 years, have you once asked?" "I don't need to ask." Her chin lifted. "Oh, I know. You know nothing." 2 words. Quiet. Final. The table went dead silent. Not the polite kind. The kind where no one breathes because they're afraid they'll miss what comes next. Janet's mouth opened. Nothing came out. And at the head of the table, Diane Holloway set her napkin down for the last time. "Now," she said, "I'd like to say those few words." Diane stood with the kind of stillness that made movement feel unnecessary. She didn't adjust her jacket or clear her throat. That she simply waited until every set of eyes in the room found her, which took about 3 seconds. "Janet," she began, "I've listened politely all evening. I've watched you introduce your guests, give your speech, and share your version of your family. That is your right." Janet's smile tightened. "Thank you, Mrs. Holloway. But I cannot sit quietly while you speak about this young woman the way you have." Diane's voice didn't rise. It lowered, and that was worse. "Ma, not when I know what I know." The room tilted. Janet's smile cracked at the edges. Mrs. Holloway, I appreciate your concern, but this is a family matter. You don't— The issue, Diane said, is that Morgan is not a stranger to me. She let that sentence sit. Kevin's uncle leaned back. Lauren's hand found Kevin's under the table. Pam Driscoll put her wine down. Richard stopped chewing. Janet shook her head slowly. You know Morgan? Diane turned to me. Her expression was warm, but controlled. The expression of someone who understood exactly what she was about to do and had decided it was necessary. Wait, she said, half to herself, half to the room. You're the woman who— She stopped. The silence that followed wasn't the polite kind from before. This silence had weight. It pressed against the walls and the windows and the ceiling. It pressed against Janet Meadows' chest. Janet's face went white. Not pink, not flushed. Dull white. The color of someone watching a door open that they thought was locked forever. And Diane Holloway was about to walk right through it. Morgan Meadows, Diane said. Meadowshine Residential. She paused, not for drama, but for precision. She was a woman who said things once and meant them permanently. I read an article about you in Inc. magazine last year, feature piece, 30 under 40, franchise founders edition. The room didn't gasp. It did something worse. It froze. As 30 people suspended between their salad forks and their assumptions. Janet let out a short breath. What? Diane continued, her voice measured and unhurried. Your daughter owns and operates a residential cleaning franchise. 14 states, 87 employees at last count. She tilted her head, as if recalling a specific paragraph. Annual revenue. If the article was accurate, approximately $2.8 million. Someone at the far end of the table whispered, Million? Janet gripped the edge of the tablecloth. That's not— She couldn't— She did. Diane folded her hands in front of her. And I should know, because I'm one of her investors. The sound that followed was not silence, but it was the opposite. The sound of 30 people recalculating everything they thought they knew about the woman sitting at the overflow table next to a second cousin with a beer. Richard set his bourbon down too hard. The glass hit the plate rim and tipped. Amber liquid spread across the white linen in a slow, dark bloom. He didn't move to stop it. He just stared at me like I'd walked in speaking a language he didn't know existed. Lauren's hand went to her mouth. Then Kevin's younger brother let out a low whistle and immediately tried to cover it with a cough. Janet sat down, though she was already seated. Her body just sank, like the scaffolding holding her up had been quietly removed. Diane sat back down. She didn't rush. She addressed the room the way she might address a board meeting, factual, composed, without malice. I manage a portfolio of luxury rental properties across the Midwest, she said. 2 years ago, and I needed a reliable residential cleaning partner for our units. Standardized quality, scalable, professional. I found an article about a company that had grown from a single operator to a multi-state franchise in under a decade. She looked at me. That company was Meadowshine. That founder was Morgan. She paused to let the information settle, then continued. I reached out. We met. I was impressed. Not just with the business, but with the person behind it. I invested. We've been working together since. Then she added almost gently, I had no idea she was your daughter, Janet. In fact, Diane's voice softened by a shade. She never once mentioned her family. That sentence did more damage than the revenue number. I could see it land across the table, the quiet understanding that I hadn't been hiding my success from my family. I simply had no family to share it with. Janet's voice came out cracked. Morgan, why didn't you tell us? I looked at her. At the woman who'd spent 29 years turning away, who replied cute to the first real thing I ever built, who placed her handbag on the empty chair beside Lauren so I couldn't sit there. You never asked. 3 words, the shortest sentence I said all night, and the heaviest. Kevin nodded slowly, not in agreement with anyone, just processing. Lauren sat motionless, tears sliding down her cheeks. Not jealousy. As something worse, the slow dawning recognition that she'd been standing on a stage her mother had built by tearing me down. It happened like a tide turning. 1 person, then 2, then the whole room. Kevin's uncle, the one who'd asked about my business, turned his chair toward me. 14 states? How'd you manage that? The woman beside him leaned in. How many employees again? 87, I said. Full-time? Most of them. Yes. A man I hadn't been introduced to, someone from Kevin's side, looked over. Residential only, or do you do commercial? Just like that, I was no longer the footnote. I was the story. Janet saw it happening. I watched her face cycle through 3 expressions in 5 seconds: shock, calculation, recovery. She straightened up, pressed her palms flat on the table, and smiled. Well, I always knew Morgan had potential. Didn't I say that, Richard? I always said she had something in her. She reached for Diane's arm. We've always supported her, of course. Every step of the— Janet. Diane's voice was quiet, almost kind, which made it worse. 2 minutes ago, you told this table your daughter's business was a van and some buckets. She let the silence do its work. Everyone in this room heard it. The room didn't move. The jazz from the ceiling speaker played a soft piano bridge that no one listened to. To Pam Driscoll, Janet's closest friend, the woman who'd laughed at every joke tonight, slowly slid her chair 6 inches away from Janet. The wooden legs scraped against the floor. In the silence, it sounded like a door closing. Janet opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. Nothing came out. Richard stared at a water stain on the tablecloth where his bourbon had spilled. He hadn't wiped it up, he hadn't said a word, and for the first time in 29 years, Janet Meadows had no script. I looked at my mother then, really looked, and I wondered, did she ever actually love me? Or was I just a background character in the story she wrote for Lauren? Why does a mother choose to humiliate her own child in public instead of admitting she was wrong? I still don't have the answer. Maybe you do. Let me know in the comments. I stood up. Not fast, not dramatically. I folded my napkin, placed it beside my plate, and pushed my chair back the way you do when dinner is over and you have somewhere to be. The room went still. I didn't come tonight to prove anything, I said. My voice was steady. I made sure of that. I came because Lauren asked me to, because she's my sister and I love her, and I wanted to be here for her night. I looked at Janet. She was gripping her wineglass so hard her knuckles had gone pale. But I won't sit at any table where my existence is treated as an embarrassment. I let the sentence land, didn't soften it, didn't follow it with an apology. Then I turned to Diane. Thank you, I said, not for telling them about my company, but for asking me, when no one else did. Diane held my gaze. She nodded once, firm, warm, the kind of nod that says everything it needs to. I looked at Lauren last. She was still crying, trying to hold it together, Kevin's hand on her back. Tao, my little sister, who used to climb into my attic bed because she was afraid of thunder. Lauren, I love you. I wish you every happiness. I paused, swallowed. But after tonight, I need space. Lauren nodded. She didn't argue. She knew. I picked up my jacket from the back of my chair, walked past the long table, past the 30 people who'd watched my mother erase me and were now watching me leave with my back straight and my name intact. I didn't slam the door, I didn't run, and I didn't look back. The parking lot was cool and quiet. September air, crickets. I sat in my car for 7 minutes before I turned the engine on. Lauren called at 11:14 p.m. I was sitting on my couch in sweats, holding a cup of tea that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. I almost didn't answer. But the phone buzzed 4 times, and I could feel the urgency through the screen. Hey, I said. Sis? Her voice was raw. I need to tell you what happened after you left, she told me. And after I walked out, Janet tried to recover. She's always been dramatic. You know how it is with— She gestured vaguely toward the door. Nobody responded. Nobody laughed. Nobody nodded. Diane turned to Kevin and said quietly, We'll talk at home. Her tone wasn't angry. It was cold, which, as Lauren put it, was somehow worse. Richard attempted damage control. He leaned toward Diane, voice low, almost pleading. Mrs. Holloway, please, don't let this affect— Diane cut him off without raising her voice. Mr. Meadows, I'm not judging your daughter. I'm judging how you treat her. Lauren said the room physically shifted after that. Chairs angled away from Janet. Conversations started and ended in whispers. 3 couples left early, citing babysitters, headaches, long drives, excuses wrapped in polite smiles. Janet went to the restroom. She was in there for 12 minutes. When she came out, her mascara was smudged. Yes, nobody mentioned it. Lauren said, "Sis, I've never seen Mom like that. She looked small." I didn't feel satisfaction. I want to be honest about that. I felt tired. The kind of tired that lives in your bones, not your body. "I hope she's okay," I said. And I meant it. Then I added, "But I'm not coming back." Lauren was quiet for a long time. Then, "I know. Ridgewood is the kind of town where news doesn't travel. It arrives. Before the breakfast dishes are cleared, everyone already knows." By Monday morning, the story of the engagement dinner had spread through every Bible study group, hair salon waiting room, and produce aisle in a 12-mile radius. The details varied. Someone said I owned 100 employees. Someone else said Diane Holloway wrote me a check on the spot. But the core was always the same. Janet Meadows humiliated her daughter in public, and it backfired spectacularly. And Janet had spent 15 years building her reputation as the backbone of the women's ministry at First Covenant Church. She organized the canned food drive. She coordinated the Easter egg hunt. She was the first to sign up for every committee and the last to leave every potluck. That Tuesday, 2 families quietly withdrew from her prayer circle. No explanation, just sudden scheduling conflicts that would last indefinitely. On Wednesday, Pam Driscoll called, not to check on Janet, to deliver a verdict. "Janet, I think you need to call Morgan, apologize properly. People are talking." "People are talking about what? I'm her mother. I have the right to—" "You have the right to be her mother," Pam said. "You don't have the right to humiliate her in front of 30 people." Janet hung up. She called Pam back an hour later. Pam didn't answer. "I heard about all of this secondhand through Lauren, who called me every few days now. Careful. These tentative calls, like someone learning to use a phone for the first time." I didn't gloat. I didn't say good. I listened, and I said, "I hope Mom finds a way through this." I meant that too. You can love someone and still refuse to stand in their line of fire. The wedding wasn't canceled, but it was postponed. Kevin told Lauren the following weekend, gently, over coffee at a diner halfway between Ridgewood and his apartment in Marion. "I love you," he said. "That hasn't changed. But I need to understand your family better before I marry into it." Lauren didn't fight him. She cried, but she didn't argue, which, for someone raised by Janet Meadows, was an act of extraordinary courage. Kevin proposed a condition: family counseling. A neutral therapist, 6 sessions minimum, before they set a new date. He wanted to understand the dynamics he'd just witnessed. He wanted to make sure they wouldn't repeat themselves. I'm not asking you to choose between me and your parents," he said. "I'm asking you to see what I saw." Lauren agreed. Diane, meanwhile, had her own conversation with Kevin, over the phone, the night after the dinner. "I'm not opposed to Lauren," she told him. "She seems like a good person. But the way that family operates, if they do this to their own daughter in public without blinking, what would they do to a daughter-in-law?" Kevin didn't have an answer. That was the point. When Janet heard the wedding was delayed, she didn't call Lauren. She called Richard. "This is Morgan's fault," she said. "She ruined the whole evening. She always has to make it about herself." Richard said nothing. He was learning that his silence, the one that had protected him for 30 years, now worked against him. Because silence, it turns out, is only comfortable when nobody is listening. And now, for the first time, everyone was. And Janet spent the next 6 months blaming me for a problem she'd set in motion 29 years ago. Some habits don't break easily, even when they should. Diane and I met for coffee the following Thursday. Her choice. A quiet bakery in Marion, away from Ridgewood, away from the noise. She ordered a black coffee. I ordered the same. She looked at me across the small wooden table and said something I didn't expect. "I owe you an apology." I shook my head. You told the truth." "I told the truth publicly, without asking your permission first." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "I should have pulled you aside, given you the choice. Instead, I reacted to your mother's behavior and, well, I made a decision on your behalf." I let that sit for a moment. Then I said, "If you'd asked me beforehand, I probably would have said, 'Don't bother.' I've spent my whole life not correcting people about me. And how has that worked out?" I almost smiled. Not great." Diane sipped her coffee. When I invested in your company, it was because you were smart and the numbers were solid. That hasn't changed. She set the mug down. But after that dinner, I respect you for something else entirely. What's that? The way you left the room. No shouting, no tears, no retaliation. You just stood up and walked out with your dignity intact. She paused. That's rarer than people think. I stared at a knot in the wooden table. Yeah, I ran my thumbnail along it. I learned something from being underestimated my whole life, I said. The best response isn't proving them wrong. It's just building, quietly, consistently, and letting the work speak. Diane smiled. The work spoke plenty that night. We sat there a little longer. Two women, a generation apart, drinking black coffee and saying very little. It was the most understood I'd felt in years. 3 weeks after the dinner, my phone rang. Janet. I was in my home office reviewing a contract for a new franchise location in Michigan. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. But something in me, that old stubborn root that never fully dried out, made me pick up. Morgan, we need to talk. Okay? People at church are asking questions. Pam won't return my calls. 2 families left my prayer group. I need us to fix this. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes. You're calling because people are asking, not because you think you did something wrong. I didn't do anything wrong. I was honest. You told 30 people your daughter was a failure, while she was sitting in the room. I said you cleaned houses. That's the truth. It's a piece of the truth, and you used it as a weapon. Silence on the line. I could hear her breathing, could almost hear the calculations. How to spin this? How to reframe? How to come out the victim? You were always difficult, Morgan. There it was, the trapdoor she always used when she was cornered. Make it my fault. Make it my personality. Make it Morgan's problem. Mom, I'm not cutting you off. I want you to hear that. I'm not disappearing. Then what do you want? I want you to stop lying. Not to me, to yourself. I won't come back to that table until you look at me and acknowledge what you've been doing for 29 years. You want me to get on my knees and beg? No. I want you to stop pretending. She hung up. I set the phone down, looked at the Michigan contract, got back to work. Lauren drove to my house on a Sunday in October. She'd never been before. I watched her from the front window as she parked, sat in her car for a full minute, then walked up the steps like she was visiting somewhere sacred, slow, deliberate, looking at everything. My house was simple. 3 bedrooms, a yard I barely used, and a porch with 2 rocking chairs I'd bought for company I rarely had. Inside, clean lines, neutral tones, and 1 framed photograph on the living room wall. Lauren stopped in front of it. Who's that? Grace Whitfield, my first client. She passed last spring. She looks kind. She was. She's the reason I kept going. Lauren turned to me. Her eyes were red before she even started. Sis, I'm sorry. You don't need to apologize for Mom. I'm not apologizing for Mom. Her voice broke. I'm apologizing for me. For knowing how they treated you, and sitting there, every holiday, every dinner, every time Mom said something cruel, I looked at my plate. I didn't tell her it was okay, because it wasn't. But I understood. You were surviving the same house, I said, from the other side of the door. She wiped her eyes, sat on my couch, looked around at the home I'd built without anyone's help. Tell me about your company, she said. Some not because it's impressive, because you built it alone, and I didn't even know. We talked for 3 hours. About franchise logistics and hiring challenges and the time I lost a client because a new employee accidentally broke a chandelier. Normal things. Sister things. Before she left, she told me Diane wanted to expand the investment partnership. The dinner, it turned out, had opened a door neither of us expected. From the wreckage, Lauren said. Something good. I hugged her at the door. It's not too late to start. The month after the dinner was the quietest of my life, and the fullest. I didn't call Janet, didn't call Richard. I let the silence sit between us, not as punishment, but as space. The space I should have claimed decades ago. I went to work. I reviewed applications for 2 new franchise locations. I hosted a team meeting where one of my longest-serving employees, a woman named Carla, She told the room she'd just put a down payment on her first house using the savings from 3 years of steady employment. I cried in my office after everyone left. The good kind. When my staff asked if I was okay, they'd heard pieces of the story, the way small town stories travel. I said, better than I've been in years. And it was true. I'm not telling you this story to show off a revenue number or an investor's name. I'm telling it because somewhere out there, when someone is sitting at the end of a table, at a family dinner being introduced as the disappointment, and they're wondering if it's true. It's not. You don't need anyone's permission to succeed. You don't need anyone's acknowledgement to make your success real. And you absolutely do not need to accept being humiliated just to keep your seat at the table. A boundary is not a wall. It's a door. And you get to choose who walks through it. My mother hasn't apologized. My father hasn't called. I don't know if they ever will. But I know this. My name is Morgan Meadows. I started with a bucket, a sponge, and a woman named Grace who saw something in me that my own parents refused to see. And I built something that speaks for itself, even when they wouldn't let me. That's my story. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. If you've ever had to set a boundary with your own family, a hard one, the kind that costs you sleep, I want to hear about it. And drop your story in the comments. You're not alone in this. If this video moved you, hit like and share. Not for me. For the person in your life who needs to hear that walking away from a toxic table isn't weakness, it's strength. And if you want to hear another story like this one, there's a link in the description. I think you'll connect with it. I'll see you there.